break up the corporate state looters, and the untold story of Middle East terrorism. Coming up on today's Citizens Report. Welcome to the Citizens Report for the 27th of March 2025. I'm Elisa Barwick. Joining me today is Citizens Party Research Director Robert Barwick. Welcome, Robbie.
Thanks, Lisa.
And Victorian Senate candidate, I should say.
Yes, we'll know this weekend whether that race is on yet.
Yes, well, it's on, but we just don't know exactly when. But it's certainly on. Now, in today's show, we're going to discuss the monopolies, duopolies and oligopolies that dominate the Australian economy, but not only in the corporate world, politics too.
Yep, there's a political duopoly, and there's only one thing to do with all of them: break them up.
Absolutely. And then we're going to discuss the worst terrorist attacks you've never heard of. So stay tuned for that, it's most interesting. Now, please do hit the like button and share this as widely as you can. Make a comment below. All of those things will help get the show pumped out through the internet. And if you can donate, please see the link in the information box below, because we do need your support with all the campaigning and events and travelling around that's going on already, even though the election's not officially declared yet. Now, you do have an update, Robbie, before we get into the major topics.
Yes, Elisa, I want to play the viewers a 12-year-old clip from Australian television. And what you're going to see on this clip is, this is from The Living Room, the Channel 10 show, and it's going to go for 3 minutes, and you're going to see Dan Duggan in person. Now, we've talked about Dan Duggan a lot over the last 2.5 years. Next month, Dan Duggan will have been in prison for 2.5 years without having broken any Australian laws. He's away from his wife, Safrine, and his 6 children. Three of his children are older teenagers, and one's an adult. 3 of his children are very young children, right? So in their formative years, they've been denied their father. He's been locked up in multiple New South Wales prisons, like I said, without having broken any Australian law or any Australian charges against him.
No conviction as yet or anything.
Nothing. It's because of an extradition request by the United States. So instead of rehashing all that, I mean, ask yourself, well, just say the United States has grounds to try and extradite him, and he has grounds to try and oppose that, of course. But why does he have to be in prison? Why couldn't he be at home with an ankle bracelet on or something like that, right? He's got a family of 6 kids. You can't run, etc. It's not that easy to do. Have I actually looked? But in all the time we've talked about this, I've never seen Dan Duggan in person, right? I've seen photos of Dan Duggan. I've never spoken to Dan Duggan. I know people who have spoken to Dan Duggan, because it's actually not easy to speak to him. Right? I talk to people who do. Were you going to say something?
I was just going to say, just to inform those that don't know, the charges against him are of passing on American military secrets to Chinese. Like, that's what the Americans are pursuing in regard to this case. The
charges come under the umbrella of the laws that apply to that, but they're not actually charging him with passing on secrets. They're charging him with breaching those laws. They're called trafficking in arms regulations. America has a suite of laws called trafficking in arms regulations. And because what you're about to see is a year after, in 2012, he did a stint in South Africa as a consultant to a flight school which was training pilots, including Chinese pilots. And nothing was an issue until he was indicted in 2017 by the Americans. And no one in 2012 was talking about war with China. By 2017, of course, they were. And they wanted to make an example of this guy and scapegoat him. But he wasn't able to be arrested until 2022, and he's been in jail ever since. But have a look at the Dan Duggan. Just watch this clip for the next 3 minutes and ask yourself, does this Australian citizen, this Australian father, now he was American born, but he became a naturalised Australian citizen on Australia Day 2012, right? Does he deserve to have been in prison for the last 2.5 years?
how did we get from island paradise to one upside down, freaked out hombre? This is one straight from the bucket list. It's a Top Gun flying experience you and Miguel will never forget.
Hey guys.
Hey,
How are you? Welcome to Top Gun.
Amigo.
Hola.
Hola.
Miguel, or I should say goose.
Goose. Yeah, it could be like a duck or a pigeon. I got to be a goose.
No, trust me, that name is very, very appropriate.
Yeah, thank you.
Just continue.
Yes.
You're going to be flying in the mighty Nanchang today. It's what the Chinese Air Force uses their official training aircraft. Fully aerobatic, capable of up to 6 Gs and minus 3.5. Maverick, the Jet Provost, flown by the Royal Air Force. It's what the English used as their initial jet trainer.
For those of you who aren't Top Gun pilots, 4Gs, yeah, that's 4 times your own body weight. We're about to be put through a mix master.
Sting like a bee. Fly like a butterfly.
Since this is Miguel's first trip to Tassie, I'm thinking I'd like him to get, well, the most out of his experience.
If there's a moment when we're flying, for you to sort of turn 4 Gs and 5 Gs to 3 or 4 rolls instead of just one, can you take it?
Yeah, no problems.
See you up there.
I feel the need for speed.
Oh, I didn't expect that.
Our mission takes us out over Frederick Henry Bay, next to Hobart. Major Dan and the other flyboys are trained military fighter pilots, which means they can do this.
It'd be good if my eyes could focus on it.
A word of warning, this is exy. I'm in the jet fighter and trust me, it'll be the fastest money you'll ever spend. Miguel's in the Warbird and he gets to lose his lunch for a lot less.
Now, I tweeted about this, Elisa, and I included Dr. Chris Brown and Miguel Maestra, his name is. People would recognise those identities in the tweet. They haven't responded yet. Maybe they've forgotten that this guy gave them the time of their lives by the looks of it. But that's the man who's now been in prison for 2.5 years, right? With having broken no Australian laws. The Citizens Party seems to be the only the only organisation that's actually prepared to advocate for Dan Duggan. And I'm not advocating for him because I'm saying that we can say without a court case that he's perfectly innocent or perfectly guilty. The reason we're advocating is we can say absolutely emphatically that there's no way in the current climate that has existed since, say, 2019, 2020, that Dan Duggan will ever get a fair trial in Australia or in the United States. There is especially in the United States, there's an extreme xenophobia. There's an agenda to stoke war with China, paint China as the enemy, and he will be cactus, if I can use an Australian expression. So now you've seen the clipping. Please share that with people who have an interest in this story. Have a look at Dan Duggan in action.
And you can send a message to the Attorney General, who has the power to intervene in a case such as this.
And we'll put the link below where you can make a donation to the family, because the family is only surviving on donations from the public.
All right, on to our first topic, break up the corporate state looters. So, Australia is an economy that is completely dominated by duopolies like Coles and Woolies, by effective cartels like the big four banks, I should say monopolies like Qantas. The best example of the oligopoly, or I guess it's a duopoly actually, is the Labor Liberal uniparty, as we call it.
They're effectively a monopoly. They appear to be a duopoly, but they are, the uniparty side is a monopoly. The real duopoly in Australia is the supermarkets.
Yes.
The retail duopoly, Coles and Woolies.
And then, of course, you have the mainstream media, the gas cartel. I mean, the list goes on.
The privatised electricity companies. That, you know, they were all state. The only thing that should ever be a monopoly should be state-owned, right? And where the costs are structured so people only pay enough to cover the costs of operating them. That's the only legitimate monopolies. These are private, in many cases, private monopolies now.
Yes.
We might even talk in a minute about the monopoly that of airport parking. It's another monopoly.
Yeah, we should talk about
private monopoly, and it's just incredible. Our whole country is structured around these monopolies.
Yeah, I mean,
duopolies.
I want to talk first about the supermarkets inquiry, because the ACCC, the Australian Competition Consumer Council, has just put out its report, which we've had a bit to say about. And I wanted to refer to the testimony during the hearings of that inquiry in 2024 of our Senate candidate for New South Wales, Dr. Andy Schmulo, in which he identified this same apparatus that is like an octopus strangling our economy. He said, our economy is typified by monopolies, duopolies and oligopolies. We see this with airlines, telcos, banks and energy providers, and certainly we see it in the groceries market, which is a duopoly characterised by excessive market concentration. And of course, that was the major target of this supermarkets inquiry, which, having read the report, goes through, you know, nothing that is shocking to the average Australian, at least if you do the grocery shopping.
Yeah.
You know, so things like, overall average price increases in grocery items of 24% is what they reported, but you know, oils and fats, 49% increase. You'll see that, you know, you almost have to take out a bank loan to buy a tin of olive oil and things like that. Eggs up 47%, milk 34%, cheese 33%, bread 32%, dishwasher tablets 53%. You know, that's something you really notice. But then when they get down into the more granular detail, their analysis, particularly when it comes to, for instance, where they're in regional areas, we can put up a map where people have little to no choice of where to actually shop. People are actually paying double for the same basket of consumer items as they would in the cities.
Yep.
And then other details, such as where they actually look at what they call median effective price. It showed that in some categories, for instance, milk was up, if you took that measure, by 76%. And potatoes by 43%. So it depends how you look at it, how you break it down.
Yet the inflation rate is less than 3%.
Exactly. So go figure.
Well, I can explain it just quickly. The CPI has all these different items in it, including the essentials, but they then go and weight those items according to other criteria as well. And they'll do things like say, if you buy a computer, when you pay for a computer this year's model, we won't just take the price difference to last year, because technology tends to get cheaper over time. We won't just take the price difference, but we'll take the quality difference and put a value on that and take down the price, subtract that from the price even further. So those sort of things which you can live without, those sort of things get weighted and they drag down the CPI. Meanwhile, the things that you can't live without are soaring, and they're offset against that, right? And it makes the CPI look lower than it actually is.
So the final report from the ACCC found that Aldi, Coles and Woolworths appear to be among the most profitable supermarket businesses globally. I mean, appear to be, you know, that's their language, but these mega businesses...
When you read the report, they went looking... Right, they went looking and they couldn't find. I think they said they found one business in Canada that may be more profitable than Coles and Woolies in the whole world.
So that's what they put appear to be.
So anyway, we're going to play a clip in a minute of Andy Schmulo talking about that.
They said Coles and Woolworths market shares are increasing still, and they face no rivals of comparable scope and scale. In an oligopolistic market structure such as this, So, that's admitted there explicitly. They have little incentive to beat each other on prices, indeed. And that's how such a structure works.
They do the opposite. They do the opposite. They walk past each other's stores and they go, what prices are they getting away with today?
And
let's match it.
They take it in turns to put their specials on. So one week you'll find the cheaper olive oil at Coles and the next week it'll be at Woolies. So they, collude in that way.
They also, when they do specials, it doesn't come out of Coles and Woolies' pocket. It comes out of the suppliers' pockets, the specials. Everything's rigged in their favour.
Oh, it's shocking. Now, yes, as you said, Andy Schmuller had a few things to say about this. We put out a media release about breaking up the Coles-Woolies duopoly on the 21st of March, which we'll provide a link to. And that just reiterated the call that Dr. Schmuller made in 2024 when he spoke, when he provided testimony to the Senate Select Committee that did this inquiry into supermarkets. And he said, look, the only solution is to give the ACCC divestiture powers so it can break up the super concentrated supermarket sector. And he said, send me to Canberra, I'll break up this duopoly with a baseball bat.
Now, Elisa, there's a woman on LinkedIn named Karen Austria who has come up with a gift for Andy Schmuller of a baseball bat.
This.
Of a baseball bat. We'll put the picture on the screen. I was just sent this picture today. It says, Associate Professor Andy Schmuller, resting schmoo face. And if you want to know what that means, you've got to watch his speech to our conference, which is...
Yes, we'll put a link to that.
Back in
fantastic.
November. But she's had this baseball bat etched for Andy's purposes. This is the symbolic baseball bat that he will be... The actual baseball bat, which is going to be used symbolically...
Yes.
This is not a threat in Canberra to break up these oligopolies.
But let's play this. This is a short TikTok video that Dr. Schmuller made on the topic.
Yeah.
I've just joined TikTok because I think there's something people need to hear. Are you experiencing a cost of living crisis? Are you finding that things are just becoming crazy expensive? Are you in a position where you have to cancel holidays with your family? Or if you're a younger Australian, you have no prospect of ever owning your own home. Are you finding that when you buy groceries, every time you go and buy groceries, they're just more and more expensive? Well, last night the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission released a report into Coles and Woolworths, and guess what they found? Coles and Woolworths aren't just profitable, they're not even very profitable. They are the most profitable supermarkets in the world, right? Coles and Woolworths are the most profitable supermarkets in the whole world. Where do you think that money's coming from? This is why your groceries are so expensive. And what gets done about it? Nothing. Successive governments throw their arms up in the air and they say there's nothing that can be done. That is absolute bullshit. I've appeared before Senate inquiries into Coles and Woolworths and I have kicked them. And I've kicked them hard and I keep kicking them. And I've been saying to people for well over a year, Coles and Woolworths are a duopoly. We need to break them up. And when the government says there's nothing we can do, that's nonsense. There's plenty we can do. I'm an associate professor in a law school in Australia, and I know exactly what the solutions are. You give the ACCC a divestiture power, and you point them at Coles and Woolworths, and you say to them, break them up. They've become monopolies, and they've become duopolies. Break them up. And when Coles and Woolworths appeared before the same inquiries that I appeared at, they whinged and they whined and they carried on like stuck pigs. Oh, it's so hard. It's so difficult. You don't understand how difficult our job is. We make so little money. We're only making 1.5% margin. Yeah, mate, 1.5% margin on $3 billion worth of sales. They're absolutely killing it, man. And this is why your groceries keep going up every single time you do a shop. You go to Coles, you go to Woolworths, you buy a bag of groceries, there's nothing in it, it's $60, $70. This is out of control, man. When I've appeared before Senate inquiries into Coles and Woolworths, I found it easy to put them back in their box. All you need is the facts and the courage and the willingness to call them out. So this is why I'm standing for election. I'm standing for the Australian Citizens Party to be elected to represent the great state of New South Wales in the Federal Senate. Send me to the Federal Senate, give me the opportunity. I will break up this duopoly with a baseball bat if I have to. I'm sick of this, man. I'm sick of this, and I'm sick of all these weak-willed politicians who run around like they have no solutions. People like me present them with solutions, but they're too frightened to enact them. Why are they frightened of Coles and Woolworths? Coles and Woolworths don't vote. You vote. We vote. We are the people who put people in Canberra, not Coles and Woolworths. It's time to put somebody in Canberra who's willing to take a big stick to these supermarkets, isn't afraid to do so, and has the knowledge and the experience and the research to back it up. This is how we are going to do it. And if the ACCC or ASIC or anybody else doesn't like it, sack them. Sack them, put new people in charge of those regulators, and make sure that we break up these duopolies. The time to do it is now. I've had enough. And if you've had enough, send me to Canberra, give me a big stick, and I will beat them till my arm gets sore.
So now, before we get to some of the solutions, do you want to say something about the airport car parks or Qantas? We've got features on this in our Australian Alert Service this week, which you can read.
Well, you've got both. So there, like we said, every sector of our economy is dominated by these big corporate concentrated ownership of one or two companies, right? One or two or three companies. And starting with the banks, which is just 4 companies. But all their ownership is intertwined, so they may as well be one company. Now, our party has a perspective on this that's more than 30 years in the making, because one of the things that I can remember when I first got involved in politics in the first half of the 90s, I can remember talking to people at that time, people out in Australian industry and Australian levels of like local government, and they're all talking about this thing called the Hilmer Report. In 1989, a report had been written, the Hilmer Report, on competition policy. We were going to have an economy with more competition, and it led to these sweeping reforms for more competition in the economy. All it literally achieved was tying the hands of governments so that governments could no longer compete with businesses. They privatised everything they could, and the actual competition sunk like a stone, and we went from having multiples of everything to a handful of companies dominating literally everything. The biggest economic fraud in Australian history is called competition policy that destroyed competition.
And when there were, I might add, government agencies that did compete, such as in the case of a public hospital, they had to have their hands tied behind their backs deliberately, and prices raised and things like that under the idea of competitive neutrality, because you can't have a government agency that has certain advantages competing on an uneven field in the free market.
That's right, because the government entity would be cheaper.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't have to make a profit. So it had to structure its prices to match the prices of the entities that wanted to make a profit. And your costs went up.
Yep.
And this is not something from the last 5 years. This goes back 30 years. It's just that we now have, it is so sewn up. We've now got this everywhere you turn. So the 2 examples that are in our magazine this week, the Australian Alert Service, which you should subscribe to as a way of helping the Citizens Party as well, but staying informed, because we can't do justice on the show to the kind of in-depth research we do. But there was a hearing last week about the airlines and whether the airlines should pay fines if they have flights delayed by more than 3 hours. And in places like Europe, they do pay fines. Qantas and Jetstar are 70% of the airline market. They're a virtual monopoly. Andy Schmuller says Virgin's just there for window dressing, right? At the hearing, Qantas didn't even turn up in person. Now think about this. They have all the planes in Australia.
Yeah.
It's easier for them to get to Canberra than literally anybody else on earth.
Yep.
And Mark Svensson from Qantas couldn't even bother turning up. When this was about Qantas, they made a submission literally the day the report was supposed to be produced, not on the day 6 months earlier.
They missed the deadline. They got 5 extensions and they put it in on the last day.
And their argument was, no, there shouldn't be fines because we already have, they won't work, they'll undermine safety, they said. They actually said that they'll undermine safety if we're paying fines instead of maintaining planes. And he said, anyway, we already have an incentive to work in the best interest of the customer. And as Andy Schmuller pointed out in a release he did, this is the airline that knowingly sold flights to people on flights that were cancelled. As if they operate in the best interest of the customer. They are abusing the system. And he says they get away with it because every member of parliament is a member of the chairman's lounge, right? And Qantas has bribed them that way. So they said, no, you can't fine us, whereas Andy Schmulo made a submission that ended up in the final report. He was actually asked after the deadline to make a submission. It ended up in the final report where he pointed out, look, in Europe they do fine them, and the performance of the airlines has improved out of sight. But also, because we don't touch Qantas in Australia, we have the most expensive flights in the world, domestic flights in this country. Now, associated with that, Elisa, we have an article there about the great airport parking rip-off, because part of the whole airlines picture is they also privatised the airports as part of national competition policy and they sold Sydney Airport to Macquarie Bank. Airport parking is such a rip-off. In Melbourne, Sydney and Brisbane, the average profit for a single bay for parking one car, the average annual profit is over $5,000. Profit, just pure profit of that, 76% margin. That's what they're raking in because they can. And it doesn't just go there. The same airport corporations rig it in other ways. Now, we don't have a train to the Melbourne airport, which is really bad. They do have one in the Sydney airport, which is really, the train is really good. I love it. When I go to Sydney, most of the time I don't even need to hire a car. However, they've rigged that as well, because if you catch the train at the Sydney airport, you're paying, to get to the town, you're paying 10 times more than if you caught the train at literally the next stop to get to town.
Yep.
10 times more, because these airports are all monopolies and they can charge whatever they like, and our governments let them. Everything is rigged.
Yeah, now I just wanted to add to that, which is another plug for the alert actually, and why you should subscribe to it, get it every week, that there's probably one way, or one dramatic way, that this kind of corporate state control, top down, can be locked in even more effectively, and that is to finalise the digital revolution of the technology, particularly when you do get rid of cash and people are locked into that digital mode of operating, because you
can't escape any of it.
We wrote about this in the last week's alert service, where we talked about the Silicon Valley mafia, or what's actually dubbed the PayPal mafia. Donald Trump has brought into his government. He's filled 15 key executive branch positions with these people, and they talk about, this is big data, right? They say things like, oh, we don't need the Internal Revenue Service anymore because we got all your data anyway, right? So this is another aspect that intersects our campaigns. But number one, as we said in the lead of this week's alert service, it is the political monopoly, essentially, or the uni party. That is the key thing that we have to fight. And by way of fighting that, we wanted to show a couple of video clips from an event that we held last night. This was the campaign launch for our candidate in the seat of Calwell, just to the north of where our office is here, of Dr. Basima Hawley, an excellent candidate which comes through. And I wanted to particularly hone in on the bit that she spoke about when she spoke about getting rid of cash and the alternative of the People's Bank. And we were all there last night at this fantastic event.
Oh, it was an amazing event.
A couple of hundred people.
We're about to show some footage that I'm hoping the major parties watch, because I'll get quite nervous. I'm already, when I gave my speech, I did point out I'm already getting calls from major party politicians indicating how nervous they are about this campaign. We don't know if Basima is going to win or not, but I do think the Citizens Party's campaign there, led by her, she's a wonderful local representative. She runs a radiology business. She's a public health doctor. She's very connected and represents her community incredibly well. Now, this is an iftar dinner that you'll see. There's a lot of Muslims there, but there's a quarter of the people in this electorate are Muslims. However, Basima is not a Muslim candidate. She's a candidate who's a Muslim. She's a Citizens Party candidate. This is not about. She's just from that community, right? And that there's a large dominance of Muslims in that community. But these iftar events, Elisa, I've been to a few of them there. They're great. That's when they break their fast for Ramadan. It just happens to Ramadan is this time of the year. And it's a great opportunity to organise an event like this where they're looking forward to a meal all day and they come along to this kind of event, and this was a fundraiser for her campaign. But what she showed in this speech, so we want to play the substance so you can actually hear what she's saying, but it was a very powerful speech. I think if she gets elected to Parliament, she will set the cat among the pigeons from day one, because she's going after these big issues, which we need people in Parliament to go after in the way she is.
We must say no to a cashless society. A system that strips people of privacy and independence. While digital payments offer convenience, very convenient, tap and go, we must not be blinded by the dangers of removing cash from our economy. Cash is freedom, it's privacy, it's inclusion, it's resilience. Without cash, every transaction will be monitored, traceable. Every dollar you spend becomes a data point for corporations, banks and governments. Is that the kind of society we want to live in? Where our spending habits become monitored? What about the elderly, the homeless, the small business owners, or those in remote areas with poor internet connection? Let's not forget, system fails. Power goes out. Banks crash. Hackers attack, and we've all seen that happen. And when the system breaks, as it did during the 2018 visa outage across Europe, millions, and I say millions, were left stranded. So in a fully digital world, if the system goes down, you are locked out of your own money. So cash is not old-fashioned. It is a safeguard. It's a backup. It's a democratic tool. It gives us choice. Remember that. So let us innovate, yes, but not at the cost of freedom. Let us move forward, but not leave anyone behind. So yes to digital options, but no, a firm no, to a cashless society. What's the solution, we say? I'll tell you what the solution is. The real solution is to introduce a public postal bank operated through Australia Post. It's a government-owned bank that would protect community banking, small businesses, and keep profits in the people's hands, not corporate shareholders. You know what? Guess who's doing it? New Zealand. It works in New Zealand and it will work here. So stop letting the money go to the corporate shareholders. Let the people keep the money and the profits. We say no to a system that forgets its people. We say no to policies that punish the powerless. We say no to silence in the face of suffering. And we say yes, loudly and without apology, to something better. Yes to homes over headlines. Yes to children over ideology. Yes to small businesses, to freedom, to fairness. Yes to rebuilding this nation from the ground up with compassion, with courage and conviction. We are not asking for special treatment. We are demanding what is fair. We are not afraid of change. We are the change. Now, we will not stop until every Australian has a place to call home, food on their table, freedom and choices, and hope in their hearts. I do not come here as a rehearsed politician. I come to you as a daughter who's lost her father, a woman raised by a resilient mother. God love you. As a leader who built something from nothing, as a voice for those who have been unheard for too long. I want to be more than a representative. I want to be an inspiration and a source of empowerment. And when we uplift one another, not just as a woman, but as Australians, we create a country that is stronger, kinder, and more united than ever. So tonight I ask you to join a movement A movement that believes no one is too small to be heard. That leadership should come from the community, not careerism. Let us rise together. Let us speak truth to power. Let us demand the future we deserve. You matter. The time for silence is over. Thank you.
Send that lady to Canberra.
Absolutely. So keep an eye on the name Corwell on election night, people. That's the electorate of Corwell.
All right, now, our next topic, the untold story of Middle East terrorism. So we're going to focus in here on something that was requested by people when you did your show last week, which is the reference that you made to terrorism conducted by Israel.
Yep.
Israel's supposedly not a terrorist state, as
Well,
far as anyone would think.
Yeah, people have a one-sided view, and I'm going to give people examples that are going to shock them, but we have a red alert warning first.
Yes, so, I mean, people have been following, no doubt, in the news, the situation after the ceasefire broke in Gaza has dramatically worsened again. We've had horrific assaults on people in Syria, which is now dominated by an ISIS style government, or literally an ISIS government.
When we finish recording here, Elisa, I've got to get on the train and go to the city because we're going to, there's a vigil for the Syrian Alawite community in front of ABC headquarters in the city because of all their family over in Syria that are being slaughtered in a way we predicted for 10 years would happen, and it's happening. And
the other thing that's happened in the last week or so is the US attack on the Houthis in Yemen to support Israel and to pressure Iran. And the question we wanted to just briefly focus on is Iran next?
Yeah. Now, before we answer that question, first of all, so when you watch the Citizens Report, you will hear us say different things about Donald Trump than you'll hear on the mainstream media. So we're always happy to give credit where it's due, but the flip side of that is you have to call out the wrongdoing where it's due. And when Donald Trump bombed the Houthis a week or so ago, right? This is the guy, he campaigned on, I'm not going to start new wars, right? Instead, well, you can probably say the only credit you can give him is maybe he didn't start this, he just continued what Biden did, right? Because and we'll get into this a bit more in a minute, but the Houthis, remember, they're not going and attacking civilians. They're attacking shipping that is with Israel because Israel has been called out by the International Court of Justice for genocide, right? And the Houthis, when a country is called out by the International Court of Justice, it's incumbent on every other country to uphold that. And the only country that is Yemen, right? But on this question, there's an agenda against the Houthis because it's part of this agenda against Iran. And what the Trump, so I'm going to quote Larry Alistair Crook, who is one of the top Arab analysts in the world, the former MI6 officer, and we'll put the link below where people can watch this. He was asked, where are we at with the war against Iran? And Alistair Crook said, we're on the runway. And that's actually alarming. 2007, our organisation actually led to our show. Our organisation, 2007, led in Australia the fight against Dick Cheney's plans for an attack on Iran following the Iraq debacle. And we called it the Guns of August. And Dick Cheney was trying to plot during the American holiday summer holiday of 2007 to get a war going. And we did all kinds of emergency things, and including that's when we first got on Channel 31 as a party with a broadcast. And our first broadcast was about that in 2007. It led to our Channel 31 show, which led to this YouTube show, and we've had it going ever since. But Crook's point is that the people around Trump who are in his ear, they are totally enamored by what the Israelis seem to have achieved with the terrorist attacks on the Hezbollah leadership, which decapitated Hezbollah's leadership, weakened them, and then related to that, the Syria fell, right? And these ISIS and Al Qaeda people were able to come in and take over Syria and achieve Israel's goals and America's goals and Britain's goals and France's goals in Syria in apparently a cakewalk. And so they're thinking, if we go after the Houthi leadership in Yemen, and then go after the Iranian leadership in Iran, like the Iranian Republican Guard, which is the Americans have listed as terrorists, take out the leadership, decapitate them, and Iran, which is probably the greatest power in the Middle East, Iran will fall into line and become a pro-Western government like that. It'll be a cakewalk.
Like Iraq, yeah.
Right? Exactly the same kind of insanity,
Nuts.
right? This is the kind of thinking that's dominating now. There's an Israeli delegation, as we speak, in Washington lobbying for this, and the clock is ticking. They want this attack to happen in spring. Well, spring has started. We're in March, right? So it's autumn here, but it's spring in America. They want this to happen in spring, and that's what they're working towards. And this is insane as what Dick Cheney wanted to do in 2007, which we helped to stop. But this time it's Donald Trump. And you can't cut him any slack on this, right? If you're a Trump fan, you probably think you've got good reasons to be, but this goes against everything that he led people to say that he would do. And I'm going to give you some, and then you go, well, okay, it's because, he's so pro-Israel. Wait till we get to the part where I give you the actual history of Israel.
Let's get to that, because I just wanted to say, as a segue, after 9/11, 2001, it was with Israel's help that the Pentagon identified 7 states for regime change wars, which included Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off with Iran. So it was Netanyahu who helped identify those
Well, they all came out of
cases.
That was the list of 7 countries that he named in a book he wrote in 1996. So Netanyahu wrote this book in 1996 saying these are the regimes that must be changed. 2001, they dusted that off and said, okay, that's who we're going to target.
Cleaning up old Soviet allies, taking out supporters of Hamas and Hezbollah to create the basis for a single Israeli state, a single Middle East state, basically.
Yeah.
So Israel's terrorism.
Well, so let's just preface this by making the point, which I said last week, that when you don't know the nitty-gritty details of stuff, you're dependent on how most things are presented to you in the media. And when it comes to the question of Israel, you're told, and I grew up this way, you're told one side are fighting for their existence as a nation, the other side are terrorists. The Arabs are terrorists, the Palestinians are terrorists, Hezbollah is terrorists. These guys are fighters for their nation, right? So goodies and baddies. Well, I'm going to give you a series of examples of actual terrorist attacks in the Middle East, as horrific as anything you've ever heard. I'll also preface it by saying this is not to say that what happened on October 7 wasn't terrorism, wasn't a horrific attack. Of course it was. But this is to say that the way that was presented as if history started on October 7 and there was no lead up to that, when in fact it's actually a 70-year lead up, right? So that there's at least you've got to, so if people don't at least acknowledge there's a cycle of violence, right? And this is what happens in a cycle of violence. So then you're never going to understand what actually happened, right? And you're going to just see it in these same black and white terms. When you understand the history, you will see it absolutely is a cycle of violence, and arguably, it wasn't the Palestinian side that started it. Let me just go through these examples. There was an organisation before Israel became a state. There were 2 organisations in Israel that were known terrorist organisations. They were called terrorist organisations by the British rulers of Palestine. They were called terrorist organisations by other Jews, such as David Ben-Gurion's faction called the Haganah. He called these organisations terrorist, so they were known as the Irgun and the Stern Gang. And the Stern Gang's full name was the acronym was Lehi, L-E-H-I, and that was the acronym for the Hebrew for Fighters for the Freedom of Israel. And here's the thing to understand about these 2 organisations. They were terrorist organisations formed to fight for Jewish independence from British rule. Now, last week we put up an article, which I'll get the producer to put up again, where Yitzhak Shamir in 1990 in the San Francisco Chronicle said terrorism was okay for Jews, it's not okay for Arabs. And the reason he said that is because he headed up one of these gangs. He headed up the Stern Gang. It was named after the founder, but Yitzhak Shamir, the future Prime Minister, was the head of this gang. The other one The Irgun was headed up by another future Prime Minister, Menachem Begin. And I'll give you an example of what they did. So the Stern Gang, they were known for conducting assassinations against officials, and mainly British officials, but other ones as well. And they also conducted an assassination against, in 1948, it was the Stern Gang under Shamir's orders who ordered the assassination of the Swedish United Nations envoy to Palestine, whose name was Folke Bernadotte. They assassinated him. So they assassinated a whole heap of people. That was what the Stern Gang was known for. The Irgun did something incredible, in one sense, much more notorious. This outfit, led by future Prime Minister Menachem Begin, on the 22nd of July 1946, it was the Irgun that bombed the King David Hotel in Jerusalem. Now, they bombed it because it housed the administration of the British Mandate, rulers of Palestine. But of course, it was a hotel. It also housed a lot of civilians. They killed 96 people in that bombing, including 29 actually white British people, and most of the rest were civilians, including Jews, were killed in that bombing. And that's what I reported last week, wherein on the 60th anniversary of that attack, they had an event. There was a motion put up in the UK Parliament where the UK people commemorating that attack as the worst loss of British life in a terrorist attack at that time. They pointed out that while they were commemorating it as a terrorist attack, there was an event in Israel in 2006 celebrating the 60th anniversary of that attack, and Benjamin Netanyahu attended that event. All right, but I'll contain myself unlike I did last week. The Stern Gang, back to the Stern Gang, they didn't just wage their terrorist attacks inside Palestine/Israel. They also they bombed the British embassy in Rome. It was a pretty incompetent effect, and it only hurt 3 local people. No one was killed in that one. They also, this is true, now this didn't work either, but consider what happened to the Hezbollah attack. They also sent letter bombs to every British cabinet minister at the time in the 1940s. Now, before I go on to these other cases, just consider for a minute, these people, these Jewish terrorists, in Shamir's own words, were justified. What were they justified for? They felt that they were justified because they were fighting for their freedom from an occupier's rule. Why don't the Palestinians have the same rights to feel the same way, who are legally being occupied by Israel? Like when I say they're illegally being occupied, right? Don't get me wrong, but the legal status of their state, of where they're at, is they are under occupation by Israel. Why don't they have the right to feel the same way? So that's just to give a little bit of balance. But it gets worse. I want to give you some other examples of what happened. In 1953, there was a notorious massacre called the Kibbutz massacre. Now, Kibbutz was a Palestinian town under Jewish control. The massacre was personally, not directed, led by another future Israeli Prime Minister, Ariel Sharon. It was officially a reprisal from a Palestinian attack that had killed a bunch of people, but a much smaller bunch of people. Ariel Sharon led a whole IDF unit to this town in the middle of the night. They planted explosives. They blew up 43 houses with everyone sleeping inside, and it killed more than 69 Palestinian civilians, 2/3 of whom were women and children. And they felt justified in that reprisal, which was just and they didn't do it they could have sent in their tanks if they wanted to do it, if they wanted to make an army thing. No, they did this as a terrorist attack. And the news came out later as to how horrific it was. And of course, some of the people involved then said, well, we weren't told that these houses would be full of people. Well, Ariel Sharon knew. That's why he did it. That's known as the Kibbutz massacre. That happened in 1953. 69 Palestinian civilians killed deliberately by having their homes blown up in the middle of the night. By the way, a lot of this I'm going through has come from a book that I recently read called Rise and Kill First, Israel's Secret History of Targeted Assassinations, by an Israeli investigative reporter named Ronan Bergman. right? A lot of it. But the next one I'm going to do wasn't in the book. I found this from another source. In 1956, there was a massacre at a village called Kafr Qasim, which when I read this, I couldn't believe what I was reading. This was on the 29th of October 1956. And the way this massacre came about is Israel feared they were about to start a war with Jordan. And this town is right on the border of what's now the West Bank, right? So the Israelis feared there was about to be a war. And they declared a curfew in the middle of the day. Now, when they declared that curfew, it applied to the whole area. So the local commanders called back and said, well, there's a lot of Palestinian civilians out in the field farming who don't know that a curfew's been called. And the commanders said, well, inform them and tell them to go home. But by declaring a curfew, the order came down, anyone in breach of this curfew gets shot on sight. So most of the local commanders used their head, understood the extenuating circumstances. When the Palestinian farmers came back off the fields, they were technically in breach of the curfew, they were informed and they were told to stay in their houses. But in this one village of Kafr Qasim, the local commander didn't take that attitude. As far as he was concerned, he'd been told that there was a curfew and you shoot on sight. Even though, this came out at the time, even though he knew these people that were just walking back into his town did not know there was a curfew. He summarily executed 49 Palestinian civilians, including 19 men, 6 women and 23 children, for breaching a curfew they knew nothing about. The worst part, that is the worst part of it, sorry, but equally bad. What happened next in his case is a bit like what happened with the My Lai massacre in Vietnam, where once it came out there had been this horrific massacre of 500 people in this Vietnamese village. There was a pretense to go through a legal process. One guy got charged, etc., and then it all fell apart, and no one ever was fully punished for this. That's exactly what happened in this case, because when the news broke, the IDF and the authorities felt we better do something, but the Israeli population were not happy that this Israeli commander was being punished for this, and he was barely touched at all, right? He probably spent a few days in jail or whatever, barely touched at all. It was absolutely horrific, this thing. Now, so I haven't finished yet, but you tell me, if you're a Palestinian, growing up in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, and you know about these cases, what does it do? I've even talked about the Nakba. I have not said anything about the 1948 Nakba, where 700,000 people were cleared out. I haven't said about. I'm just talking about actual terrorist things that it cannot be confused as anything other than terrorist attacks, right, against Palestinians. And I'm not finished. 1981. We're not in Israel now. We're in Lebanon. There was a series of car bombings in Lebanon by a terrorist organisation called Front for the Liberation of Lebanon from Foreigners. And this terrorist organisation was setting off car bombs and killed hundreds and hundreds of people in Lebanon, mostly Palestinians. It turned out this terrorist organisation was a fake. This was the Israeli military, the IDF, commanded again by Ariel Sharon. Ariel Sharon was the commander of this operation. Ariel Sharon was trying to lure America into the Middle East and in the Reagan administration. And to do so, he was trying to get Palestinians to attack Israelis. And he had to provoke Yasser Arafat, and Yasser Arafat refused to be provoked. And so they set off this series of bombs. It went on for 6 months. These attacks, right? Killed hundreds and hundreds of people. They blamed it on this organisation with a fake name, but this was Israeli IDF people doing all this stuff, right? Hezbollah didn't exist then. When Hezbollah started a few years later, because the Israeli invasion of Lebanon happened the next year, when Hezbollah started in Lebanon, Hezbollah is called this terrorist organisation, they decided to copy those methods that had been used against them. They learnt it from the Israelis, the worst they've been accused of. They've learnt it from the Israelis, right? Ariel Sharon did that. This is documented Israeli history. When Ariel Sharon died, I think that's the last example of Ariel Sharon I had. When he died, Elisa, in the last 10 years, an Australian foreign minister went over there for his funeral.
Yeah, of
She
course.
So I was tweeting, why did our foreign minister, Julie Bishop, attend the funeral of the founder of a Middle Eastern terrorist organisation called the Front for the Liberation of Lebanon from Foreigners? That's what she attended the funeral of. That's who she attended the funeral of. Another one, this is pretty well known, this one. On the 16th of September 1982, there was a massacre in Lebanon of 700 Palestinians at least 700, could have been 2,750 in refugee camps. Now, the massacre was done by Lebanese Christian militia called Phalanges, but they were operating under Israeli direction. The Israelis ran the whole thing, and this is a horrific massacre. Like I said, it comes from that book, but I want to end with one other contrast. Because again, I'm not trying to downplay October 7, although people would know there's the main account of October 7 has had all sorts of claims associated with it, not true, but nevertheless it was a big attack, it was a horrific attack, a lot of people died on that day, right? I'm not trying to do that. But while I'm on this subject, it might interest people to know that in 2017, ISIS tried to get into Gaza. The head choppers of Islamic State tried to get into Gaza. And if they had got into Gaza, they would have killed all the Christians, because that's what they do. They were fought back. There was a fight. They were fought back by Hamas to protect those Christians. And we're going to put the photos now that I was given by a Palestinian Christian, gave me these photos, where this is the head of one of the leaders of Hamas. This is the Hamas negotiator that was killed by the Israelis in Iran last year. And he is with the local Christian priest and giving gifts to the local Christian priest to commemorate this event where Hamas saved the Christians of Gaza from ISIS. And what's the difference between Hamas and ISIS? Well, Benjamin Netanyahu said on the day after the October 7 attack, Hamas is ISIS. Well, not quite, Benjamin, because what we know about ISIS, it is backed by the West. Right? Hamas, whatever it is, and the worst it has done, tell me if it's done anything worse than I've just gone through, on the one hand, and understand that it claims the same justification as Yitzhak Shamir claims. It's fighting against an occupying power. And Yitzhak Shamir says that's good, that's okay for Jews to claim, not for Palestinians. That's the untold history, which you've got to find from books. The books have been written. There's a lot there. The only other one I glossed over is there's a recent book I read by the Israeli historian named Avi Shleim, who was an Iraqi Jew. There was a time when Baghdad had so many Jews, it was regarded as a Jewish city. And they all fled in 1950 to go to Israel, the brand new state of Israel. And they were told they were fleeing terrorist attacks because there was a whole series of bombs set off in Baghdad against the Jewish population. And they all felt unsafe, and here was this new country, Israel, to go to. Avi Shleim has written this book that proves it was the Mossad that set off those bombs. Conducted the terrorist attacks to frighten the Jews and get them to, because they wanted more Jews to go and live in Israel.
Now, what you've laid out here, this is exposing Israel as being responsible for state-sponsored terrorism. I mean, after 9/11, when the West declared the war on terror, we didn't go after that.
No.
Instead, we laid out this whole plan of regime change wars and fostered and sponsored and funded new terrorist agencies that have now taken over countries like Syria, which Netanyahu, this state sponsor of the head of the country that is a state sponsor of terrorism, helped to name that list of countries.
And not only is he someone who commemorates terrorism openly, like the British pointed out in 2006, his cabinet is dominated by actual terrorists. Itamar Ben
Yes.
Gvir, the National Security Minister, is an actual accused terrorist involved in the Yitzhak Rabin assassination.
And people should watch your interview with Michelle Steinberg on that. We'll link it below because that is the fuller picture of what you've gone through here. But we need to educate. Obviously, you know, this also exposes our own politicians and what and who they are allied with, not just in the war on terror, but, you know, today's geopolitical games versus Russia and China, which may be about to draw in Iran in a war that there's no going back from. So contact us, get onto the alert service, educate your MPs on these issues and participate in our campaigns. And we'll put details again below of how you can get involved and find out who our candidates are in your local area. So that's the show for this week. Thanks, Robbie.
Thanks, Lisa.
And tune in again next week.
Authorised by Robert Barwick, Citizens Party, Melbourne.